When I moved to my new suburban neighborhood, I was looking for peace and quiet, something different from the chaotic energy of the city. The houses were pristine, manicured lawns in perfect symmetry, and everything about the neighborhood seemed idyllic. It wasn't long before I met the HOA president, Carolyn, whom I immediately began to dub Karen for her overbearing attitude toward rules and regulations. At first, I thought it was harmless, typical HOA behavior, until strange things started to happen. I was living a simple, frugal life, paying attention to every detail, including my electricity consumption, trying to minimize my environmental impact. Having moved from the city, I was used to being vigilant about energy usage, but when my first electric bill arrived, I was taken aback. The charges were 3 times higher than I expected for a single occupant living in a modest home with minimal energy demands. I couldn't figure it out. No new appliances, no major temperature fluctuations, just the same simple routine. Something wasn't right. After calling the power company and asking them to check the meter, a technician arrived, ran some tests, and found no issues with the meter itself. Everything appeared to be in order, but I still had this nagging feeling that my electricity usage had somehow been inflated. The technician's suggestion that I check for hidden energy drains didn't help. Everything in my house seemed normal. I tried to dismiss it, but as days passed, the bills continued to climb with no reasonable explanation. That's when I started paying more attention to the neighborhood and noticing odd behavior around Carolyn's house. There was more traffic than usual, and people seemed to be coming and going in unmarked vehicles at odd hours. Carolyn, who had seemed friendly at first, was now acting a bit off. Her demeanor was tense, almost like she was expecting something to happen. And that's when I started to piece things together. Maybe my electricity was being siphoned, perhaps even used to power her greenhouse. At the time, I didn't know what to do about it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from a coincidence. Then, I noticed a crucial detail. There were power lines near her property that didn't seem to match the rest of the neighborhoods. The more I investigated, the clearer it became that my hunch was right. Carolyn had likely spliced into my electricity line to power her operation. I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. Something bigger was at play, and my quiet suburban retreat was rapidly turning into the setting of a crime thriller. The situation escalated dramatically when I started noticing the heavy presence of unmarked vehicles and a sense of secrecy surrounding Carolyn's every move. It wasn't just my electricity bills anymore. It was the behavior of the people around me, especially Carolyn. I had become hyper-aware of the little details, noticing subtle changes in how the neighbors acted when they spoke about her, the way they avoided her gaze when she was around. There was a shift in the air, a palpable tension, as though something darker was simmering beneath the surface. Neighbors who once exchanged polite greetings now seemed to avoid eye contact with Carolyn's household. It wasn't just normal neighborhood politics. This felt like something more sinister. I remember seeing Carolyn talking to a technician in her front yard, her body language giving her away. She was trying to appear calm, but I could tell she was on edge. She seemed to be in damage control mode. Then, it happened. A black SUV, completely nondescript with tinted windows, pulled up to her house one afternoon. A man in a dark suit stepped out. I couldn't help but notice the tension in Carolyn's posture the moment she saw him. She quickly hurried over to speak to him, but there was no friendly wave or casual chat. This was a terse conversation. He spoke to her in hushed tones, and there was something about the way he gestured toward the technicians that made me uneasy. After a brief exchange, the man returned to his SUV and drove off. It was almost like a scene from a movie. Something about the exchange felt too rehearsed, too controlled, as if they were trying to avoid being seen or heard. I couldn't shake the feeling that this man was someone important, perhaps a lawyer or even a figure with authority in the community. The more I observed, the more it seemed like Carolyn was connected to a larger network, and not just as the HOA president. This was no longer about her enforcing rules about mailboxes or fences. This was about something much bigger, something criminal. The conversations between the technicians were getting more strained, and I could hear them discussing things like deadlines and funding as they continued their inspections. My gut told me they were stumbling onto something far larger than a simple case of electricity theft. Then, another unsettling moment occurred. Bradley, one of the more influential HOA board members, walked up to Carolyn's driveway carrying a duffel bag. He didn't make eye contact with anyone as he handed it over to Carolyn. The exchange was swift, secretive, and odd. It felt like I had stumbled into a hidden operation right under my nose, and the realization that there were more people involved left me shaken. It wasn't just Carolyn anymore. It was a whole network of people who had been involved in this covert operation, and they had connections that stretched far beyond the HOA. These were people in power, possibly even city officials, who were helping to shield her and this operation. I couldn't just ignore it anymore. Carolyn wasn't a rogue HOA president making small-time thefts to fuel a greenhouse operation. This was part of a far-reaching, organized system. As I continued to dig deeper, I realized how dangerous this had become. I had already caught wind of enough to know this wasn't just about petty theft. It was something that involved bigger stakes, and the more I uncovered, the more I realized that exposing it could come with consequences. The tension reached its peak one night when I decided to go one step further in gathering evidence. My suspicion that Carolyn had been siphoning electricity for her greenhouse was no longer just a feeling. It was a conviction. I had seen enough to know that something illegal was happening right under my nose, and that the operation was more extensive than I could have imagined. I had already observed the strange vehicles, the secretive meetings, and the whispered conversations, but now I needed solid evidence. I was desperate to uncover the truth, so I hatched a plan to hide a voice recorder near Carolyn's greenhouse to capture any incriminating conversations. I waited for the cover of darkness, hoping to catch a slip-up, a mention of shipments or illegal activities. I knew the stakes were high and the risks were greater than ever. But it wasn't just the danger of getting caught that made me nervous. It was the fear of what could happen if Carolyn or anyone involved discovered that I was onto them. On my third stakeout night, I was careful to avoid making any noise, stealthily approaching the greenhouse. I was crouching low, keeping myself hidden behind a row of bushes when disaster struck. I stepped on a small rock, and the sound of gravel crunching beneath my foot echoed in the quiet night. It was a mistake I would regret instantly. In the blink of an eye, the floodlights surrounding Carolyn's property blazed to life, and I froze in place, praying that the shadows would conceal me. The next few moments felt like an eternity. Carolyn and someone else, Bradley I presumed, ran out of the house with flashlights in hand. The beam of light swung wildly over the yard, getting closer to my hiding spot. I held my breath, crouching lower into the bushes, praying they wouldn't spot me. My heart pounded in my chest, the fear of being caught sending waves of adrenaline through my body. The flashlight beams swept across the yard, missing my hiding spot by mere inches. For a moment, I was sure they had seen me, but luck was on my side. They muttered to each other, wondering who might be out there, but eventually retreated inside, leaving me breathless and shaken. That night, I decided to return to my house and regroup. I knew that pushing any further could be too dangerous, but I also knew that I couldn't let this go. The fear of what Carolyn might do, knowing that I was aware of her operation, was palpable. And the next morning, my worst fears came to life. When I stepped into my backyard the next morning, Carolyn was standing by my fence, waiting for me. The moment our eyes locked, I felt a cold rush of dread. Without saying a word, she marched straight over to me, her face a mask of fury. There was no longer any pretense of friendliness or politeness. She was raw, unrestrained in her anger. "What are you doing lurking around my property at night?" she demanded, her tone sharp and accusing. It was clear from the start that she knew exactly what I had been up to. The shock of being confronted so directly left me momentarily stunned, but the frustration I had been holding back bubbled to the surface. I didn't hesitate. I told her that I knew she was stealing my electricity, that I had seen the illegal hookup running to her greenhouse, and that I had proof. The expression on her face didn't change, and instead of denying it, she narrowed her eyes at me, cold fury radiating from her. She didn't try to explain, didn't attempt to justify her actions. She just stepped closer, the tension palpable. "So you think you can just expose me?" she spat. Her voice was venomous, and it sent a chill down my spine. "You have no idea how deep this goes." That single sentence was enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. It confirmed everything I had suspected. This wasn't just about electricity theft. Carolyn was connected to something much larger, something far more dangerous. She hinted at powerful people backing her, people who wouldn't hesitate to silence anyone who threatened their operation. The implications were terrifying. I felt a flicker of fear, but at the same time, a wave of defiance surged through me. I wasn't going to back down. "You'd better stop poking around," she warned, her voice low and dangerous, "or you'll end up regretting it." I stood my ground, my heart racing, but my resolve firm. I wasn't about to let this go, not after everything I had discovered. But then, in a move that caught me completely off guard, Carolyn changed tactics. Her gaze shifted nervously around, as if making sure no one was watching us. Then, unexpectedly, she said, "Come with me. I'll show you exactly what you're dealing with." The offer was a strange one, almost as if she was trying to pull me deeper into her world. Against my better judgment, I agreed, hoping that whatever she was about to show me would provide the evidence I needed to finally take her down. As I followed her through the gate and inside her fence line, I couldn't help but wonder, was I walking into a trap, or was this the opportunity I'd been waiting for? Either way, I knew that things were about to get far more complicated and dangerous.